The first time I saw my father on his knees, there were 6 motorcycles surrounding him, 3 men blocking his driveway, and a black-gloved hand pressed against the back of his neck. I was watching from across the street, through a rain-streaked windshield, and for one terrible second, I couldn't recognize the man in the middle of that circle. My father, Robert Hale, was 78 years old. He had spent his entire life fixing things instead of breaking them, helping neighbors instead of threatening them, and waking before sunrise because he believed an honest day's work gave a man the right to sleep peacefully at night. Now his gray hair was soaked, his old flannel shirt was torn at the collar, and a man twice his size was forcing him toward the hood of his pickup truck. I could hear the man's voice even through the closed windows. "Last warning, Robert, $5,000 every month. You miss one payment, and next time we don't come asking." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I had been out of my father's life for almost a year, telling him I was working overseas in private security. That was technically true, but it concealed almost everything that mattered. My real work had never appeared on a resume. My real employers had never appeared on a family Christmas card. For years, I had operated under identities that weren't mine, entered places where my presence was never supposed to be known, and eliminated threats that ordinary law enforcement couldn't touch. People who worked beside me knew me by a designation instead of my full name. People outside that world knew nothing. My father certainly didn't. To him, I was Ethan Hale, his quiet son who traveled too much, called every Sunday, and never talked about work. He had no idea I had been trained as an elite assassin. He didn't know how many years I had spent learning patience, observation, discipline, and control. He didn't know that the most dangerous thing about me had never been my ability to fight. It was my ability to stay completely calm while someone else was losing control. Across the street, the biggest biker shoved my father again. That was the moment I opened the car door. I stepped into the rain. One of the men noticed me first. He turned. His expression changed. I kept walking. "Ethan!" my father shouted. The biker laughed. "So you're the son." I stopped 10 feet away. "Take your hand off him." The man smiled. "Or what?" I looked at my father. He was frightened, but he was also watching me with a strange expression, as though some part of him had always suspected there was more to his son than he had been told. The biker stepped toward me. "Your old man owes us." "He owes you nothing. That's not how protection works." "Protection from what?" I asked. The man laughed. "From us." That answer told me everything. This wasn't a legitimate dispute. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was organized extortion. The men belonged to the Iron Vultures, a biker syndicate that had quietly taken control of several businesses across the county. They called their payments protection. Everyone else called them what they were: organized intimidation. The leader standing in front of me was Marcus Vale, a name I recognized from old intelligence files. He was dangerous, but he wasn't the man I was really interested in. Someone had sent him. Someone had decided my father was an easy target. And someone had decided that whatever they wanted was worth making an elderly man afraid in his own home. Marcus leaned closer. "You should leave town, Ethan. This isn't your fight." I looked at the men surrounding my father. Then I looked at him. "You made it my fight the moment you put your hands on him." Marcus smiled. "You don't know what you're getting into." He was right about one thing. He had no idea what he had just gotten into either, because while he was looking at a son who had come home angry, he was actually looking at a man who had spent years learning exactly what to do when someone threatened his family. My father refused to tell me everything that night. After the bikers finally left, he stood in the kitchen with a towel pressed against the small cut above his eyebrow and insisted he was fine. "I'm 78, Ethan, not 78 years dead." He tried to laugh, but I could see the pain behind it. I made coffee while he sat at the table, and for several minutes neither of us spoke. Rain tapped against the windows. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a motorcycle engine faded into the distance. "How long?" I finally asked. Dad looked down. "How long what? How long have they been coming?" He didn't answer. "Dad," he sighed. 3 months. I stared at him. 3 months. I stared at him. 3 months. I stared at him. First, that the neighborhood needed protection. And then they started showing up. My jaw tightened. "Why didn't you call me?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "Because I knew you'd come." I didn't know what to say to that. He had always understood me better than I wanted to admit. "They asked for $5,000 a month," he continued. "I told them I didn't have it." What happened? They broke the garage door, and you still didn't call me. I didn't want you dragged into it. I looked toward the window. I'm already in it. Dad nodded slowly. Then he reached beneath the table and pulled out an old metal box. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to my mother. She had kept it locked in a closet for years before she died. Dad placed it on the table but didn't open it. This is why they're here. I looked at him. What's inside? I don't know. You don't know. Your mother gave it to me 19 years ago. My pulse changed. Why? She told me never to open it unless someone came asking questions about our family. I stared at the box. And now they're asking. Dad nodded. 2 weeks ago, Marcus Vale asked me about you. That sentence changed everything. What exactly did he ask? Where you worked? Where you lived? Whether you were married? Whether you had children? I felt the room become colder. What did you tell him? Nothing. I opened the box. Inside were photographs, an old brass key, several handwritten notes, and a faded photograph of my mother standing beside a man I didn't recognize. On the back was a date from 19 years earlier. Underneath it were 4 words, "He knows the truth." Who is this? I asked. Dad looked at the photograph and went pale. Daniel Cross. I recognized the name immediately. Daniel Cross had appeared in an old classified case I had encountered years ago. He had been an intermediary between criminal organizations and corrupt private contractors. He had vanished nearly 2 decades earlier. Why would Mom know him? Dad didn't answer. Dad, he finally whispered, because Daniel came to her for help. I turned another photograph over. It showed the Iron Vulture's emblem, but the picture was old, much older than the Syndicate was supposed to be. They weren't formed recently, I said. Dad shook his head. No. Then what are they? He looked at the box. Something your mother was trying to expose. Before I could ask another question, headlights swept across the kitchen wall. A vehicle had stopped outside. Then another. Dad whispered, "They're back." I closed the box. My training told me to think before moving. My instincts told me to protect him. But there was another question I couldn't ignore anymore. Why had the Iron Vultures spent 3 months extorting an elderly man when what they really wanted seemed to be information about his son? The next morning, I moved my father to a small guest house owned by an old family friend named Samuel Grant. Samuel was 71, retired, stubborn, and had known my father since childhood. He didn't ask questions when I told him Dad needed somewhere quiet to stay. He simply opened the door and said, "Bring him in." Dad complained about leaving his house, but I ignored him. For the first time since arriving, I could think without watching the windows every few seconds. I called an old contact named Adrian Cole. We hadn't spoken in 14 months. Adrian had been one of the few people who knew what I had really done for a living. When he answered, he didn't say hello. "You shouldn't be calling me. Someone threatened my father." Silence. "Who?" "Iron Vultures." Another pause. "How bad?" "They're asking about me." Adrian exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't ordinary extortion." "I know. What do you have?" I told him about the box. He asked for photographs of the documents. I sent them. 20 minutes later, he called back. "Ethan, listen carefully. That name on the photograph, Daniel Cross, is connected to an old investigation." "I know." "No, you don't know all of it. Tell me." Cross was believed to have been involved with a network that moved money through motorcycle clubs, construction companies, trucking firms, and private security companies. How much money? Enough that people disappeared when they got too close. I looked at my father's box. What happened to Cross? He vanished. And my mother? Adrian was silent. "What?" I asked. "Your mother's name appears in one of the archived files." My stomach tightened. "What does it say?" "That she received something from Cross shortly before he disappeared." "What?" "We don't know." "Then find out." Adrian hesitated. "There is another problem." "What?" "Marcus Vale wasn't supposed to become involved with your father." "Why?" "Because Vale reports to someone else." "Who?" "Victor Rourke." I knew the name. Everyone who had spent enough time studying organized crime knew it. Victor Rourke had started as a motorcycle mechanic and eventually built a criminal network that operated through legitimate businesses. He rarely appeared in public. He didn't threaten people personally. He delegated fear. "Where is Rourke?" I asked. "Nobody knows. Someone does." "Maybe?" Adrian sent me an address. An abandoned repair shop outside town. "What is this?" "One of Rourke's old properties. I drove there that afternoon. The building was empty except for dust, broken equipment, and old oil stains. But something immediately caught my attention. A fresh tire mark cut across the dirt outside. Someone had been there recently. Inside, I found an office with a locked cabinet. The brass key from my father's box fit perfectly. I opened it. There were files, bank statements, photographs, names, payments. The Iron Vultures weren't just collecting protection money. They were moving money for someone, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, and several payments went to the same person, Sheriff Thomas Bell. I knew him. Everyone in town did. He had attended my father's retirement party. He had shaken my hand. He had told me how proud he was that I served my country. Now I was looking at evidence suggesting he had been taking money from the people threatening my father. I photographed everything. Then I heard a sound behind me. A floorboard creaked. I turned. A man stood in the doorway. Marcus Vale. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You really should have stayed out of this," he said. I looked at him. "You really should have left my father alone." He took one step forward. "Rourke wants the box. Tell him to ask nicely. You don't understand who you're dealing with." "I understand enough." Marcus studied me. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No." "Then what are you?" I looked at him. "Someone who doesn't like repeating himself." He reached inside his jacket. I moved first. The confrontation was brief and controlled. Marcus ended up on the floor, breathing hard, his weapon pushed far out of reach. I didn't hurt him more than necessary. I needed answers. "Where is Rourke?" He refused to speak. "Why does he want the box?" Silence. "What did my mother have?" Marcus finally looked at me. Fear flickered across his face. "Your mother wasn't the person you think she was." Then he smiled. "And neither are you." That was when I realized he knew something about my past. The question was how much. Marcus wouldn't talk until Adrian arrived with authorities. I handed him over rather than taking matters into my own hands, because I wanted the network exposed, not merely one man removed from it. But before they took him away, Marcus said something quietly. "Rourke knows your real name." I felt the words hit harder than any physical threat. My real identity had been buried for years. Only a handful of people knew it. If Rourke knew, then someone had been feeding him information from inside the system. I returned to the guest house and found my father sitting on the porch. "You found something," he said. "Yes." "About your mother?" "Yes." Dad looked toward the yard. I knew this day would come. I sat beside him. "Tell me everything." He closed his eyes. "Your mother met Daniel Cross because he was trying to get away from people he had worked with." "The Iron Vultures?" "Not yet. They had another name then." "What did he give her?" Dad looked at me. "A list. Names, accounts, businesses, officials." I thought of Sheriff Bell. Why didn't she take it to the police? Because she discovered some of the police were already involved. So what did she do? She copied everything. Dad reached inside his jacket and pulled out another envelope. "She left this for you." My hands went cold. I opened it. My mother's handwriting covered the page. She wrote that she knew there might come a day when people from the past would return. She wrote that she had hidden evidence because she couldn't trust institutions to protect it. And then she wrote something that stopped me completely. "Ethan, if they ever come for your father, don't become the man they expect you to be. Use your head, protect him, expose them. Don't let anger make you careless." I read those words twice. Dad watched me. "She knew about your work," he said. "How?" "Because she was your mother." He smiled sadly. "You were never as good at hiding things from her as you thought." I folded the letter. "What else did she know?" "She knew you were trained to kill." The words landed heavily. I looked away. "Did she hate me for it?" "No." Dad's voice softened. "She feared what it might do to you." I sat silently. For years, I had believed secrecy was protecting my family. Now I realized my mother had spent her final years worrying that the life I chose would eventually follow me home. That night, the guest house lost power. The lights went out. Dad and I looked at each other. Then the phone rang. I answered. No one spoke. A few seconds later, a message arrived. "Your father for the box. Tomorrow night. Old Quarry. Come alone." Dad watched my expression. "They're coming for me." "Yes." "What are you going to do?" I looked at the dark windows. "I'm going to make them believe they have exactly what they want." Dad frowned. "And what do they actually have?" I smiled slightly. "Nothing yet. But there was something I hadn't told him. The documents from the repair shop had revealed a hidden account connected to Victor Rourke, and the account contained a transaction scheduled for the following evening. Someone inside the syndicate was preparing to move the final evidence. If I could identify that person, I could expose the entire network. But there was a problem. The person receiving the money was someone my father knew personally. It was Samuel Grant, my father's oldest friend, the man who had opened his home to us. I stared at the transaction record for almost a minute before accepting what I was seeing. Samuel had received 3 payments from a shell company connected to Rourke. The amounts weren't enormous, but the timing was perfect. Every payment occurred shortly before the Iron Vultures visited my father's house. I called Adrian. I need a background check on Samuel Grant. Why? Just do it. 20 minutes later, Adrian called back. Ethan, there's something strange. What? Grant worked for a private security company 19 years ago. My stomach tightened. Which one? Hawthorne Security. The same company connected to Daniel Cross. The same company mentioned in my mother's documents. Anything else? He disappeared from the company records after Cross vanished. And then? He became a mechanic, opened a garage, retired. I looked at the guest house window. Samuel was inside making tea for my father. He looked exactly like the harmless old friend he claimed to be. What do you think? Adrian asked. I think he knows more than he's saying. That night, I confronted Samuel privately. He didn't deny it. He simply sat down and stared at the floor. Your mother trusted me, he said. Did she trust you? Yes. Did you betray her? His eyes filled with regret. No. Then why did Rourke pay you? He looked at me. Because I was trying to keep him away from your father. I didn't understand. Samuel explained that years ago he had agreed to take small payments from people connected to Rourke so he could monitor them. He had been trying to identify the people inside the organization. But somewhere along the way, the syndicate discovered his connection to my family and began using him. They threatened my daughter, he said. I had no choice. Where is she? Safe. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. That answer humanized him, but it didn't erase the danger. Who has the evidence? I asked. Samuel looked at me. Rourke. What evidence? The master ledger. Where? He keeps it in a private vault beneath an old motorcycle dealership. I looked at him. How do you know? Because I helped him move it. I had the location. I also had a choice. I could walk into that building alone and end the problem the way I had been trained to end problems. Or I could do what my mother had asked me to do, expose them. I chose the second. We spent the next several hours coordinating with Adrian and federal investigators. The goal wasn't to storm the building. It was to make sure every piece of evidence survived. By morning, we had warrants, financial records, witness statements, and enough information to bring down the network. But Victor Rourke wasn't stupid. He knew something had changed. That afternoon, Marcus Vale escaped custody. By sunset, my father disappeared. There was no broken window, no forced door, no struggle, just an empty chair on the porch and a note. Bring the box to the quarry. Come alone. If you bring anyone, your father dies. I read the note twice. My training screamed at me to ignore the threat and follow the evidence. My heart screamed something else. Dad was somewhere in the hands of men who believed fear gave them control. I called Adrian. They have my father. Where? Query. We're coming. No. Ethan. If they see law enforcement, they move him. Silence. Then what are you going to do? I looked at the photograph of my father sitting beside my mother 20 years earlier. I'm going to bring him home. I drove toward the quarry alone, but I wasn't going unprepared, and more importantly, I wasn't going without a plan. The syndicate believed they were setting a trap for me. They didn't realize I had already turned their trap into the beginning of their downfall. The old quarry was surrounded by darkness when I arrived. 3 motorcycles stood near the entrance. A black SUV waited beside an abandoned warehouse. I stepped out carrying the metal box. I'm here. A light came on inside the building. Marcus Vale appeared in the doorway. Beside him stood Victor Rourke. I had seen photographs of him before, but photographs didn't capture the calmness in his eyes. He looked like a businessman, not a criminal. Gray hair, black coat, no visible weapon. Ethan Hale, he said. Finally. I held up the box. Where's my father? Rourke nodded toward the building. 2 men brought Dad forward. His hands were tied, but he was standing. Ethan, don't give them anything. Rourke smiled. Your father is brave. He's stronger than you think. I know. Rourke stepped closer. That's why I needed you. I watched him carefully. You didn't need me. I needed what your family knows. What did my mother know? Rourke's expression changed slightly. More than she should have. Did you kill her? He didn't answer immediately. Your mother died because she refused to understand how the world works. My hands tightened. That's not an answer. She believed truth was enough. Rourke looked at the box. She was wrong. I stepped forward. No, she was right. You were just afraid of it. Rourke smiled. You sound like her. Then Marcus grabbed my father by the shoulder. I felt every instinct in me demand action, but I stayed calm. Let him go. The box first. I placed it on the ground. Rourke nodded to Marcus. Marcus opened it. He searched the contents. His expression changed. It's empty. Rourke looked at me. Where is the ledger? I smiled. I don't have it. His face hardened. Then you don't get your father. You misunderstand. I looked toward the darkness behind him. You don't have him either. Suddenly, lights appeared across the quarry. Vehicles moved into position. Federal agents surrounded the property. Rourke looked around. You brought them. No. I shook my head. You brought yourself. The evidence had already been transferred. The documents from the repair shop had been authenticated. Samuel had given a sworn statement. Marcus's communications had been preserved. The financial records were secured. And the moment Rourke had threatened my father on recorded audio, he had sealed his own fate. Rourke stared at me. You think this ends here? For you, yes. He laughed. You could have killed me. I could have. Why didn't you? I looked at my father. Because my mother asked me not to become you. Rourke's smile disappeared. Agents entered the warehouse. Marcus surrendered. The other bikers dropped their weapons. Rourke was arrested without a fight. The entire syndicate began collapsing before midnight, but one final piece remained. The master ledger wasn't in the box. It had been with Samuel all along. He had hidden it years earlier in a storage unit under his daughter's name. When federal agents opened it, they found everything. Every payment, every bribe, every business, every corrupt official, every person the Iron Vultures had threatened. The network wasn't just exposed, it was dismantled. Sheriff Bell was arrested 2 days later. Several businessmen were indicted. 3 officials resigned. Victims who had remained silent for years finally came forward. And Daniel Cross, the man everyone thought was dead, appeared before investigators and confirmed my mother's story. She had never wanted revenge. She wanted the truth preserved until someone could safely expose it. That someone became me. Not because I was an assassin, because I was her son. My father came home 6 weeks later. The house looked different after everything that had happened, but he insisted on keeping the broken mailbox because, in his words, it reminds me what idiots look like when they underestimate old men. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Dad had always been like that. Even after everything, he found a way to make a joke. We repaired the porch, replaced the window, painted the front door. Life slowly became ordinary again. But I couldn't forget what had happened. One evening, Dad and I sat outside with coffee while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Ethan, he said, are you going back? I knew what he meant. No, for good? I looked at him. For good. He nodded. Your mother would have liked that. I smiled. She would have told me to get a normal job. Dad laughed. She would have told you to stop disappearing for months. I looked across the yard. I should have come home sooner. Dad shook his head. You came home when I needed you. Those words stayed with me. Because the truth was, I had spent years thinking my greatest skill was knowing how to survive dangerous situations. I had learned to watch shadows, read people, remain calm under pressure, and act without hesitation. But none of that mattered as much as one simple thing. I came home. The Iron Vultures had believed my father was an easy target because he was old. They had looked at his gray hair and slow walk and assumed weakness. They had seen a retired mechanic and imagined a frightened man with no one to defend him. What they never understood was that an elderly father doesn't need to be powerful when the person who loves him is willing to stand beside him. They also didn't understand that the son they threatened had no interest in proving how dangerous he could be. I had already lived that life. I knew exactly where it led. Violence creates silence, but truth creates consequences that can last for generations. Rourke had built his organization on fear. When fear disappeared, his organization disappeared with it. That became the real revenge. Not watching him suffer. not hurting the men who had threatened my father, watching the entire system they believed was untouchable collapse under the weight of its own secrets. Every bribe became evidence, every threat became testimony, every hidden payment became a trail, every frightened victim became a witness. And every person who had once believed the iron vultures were too powerful to challenge finally saw that they weren't. My father still lives in that same house. He still complains when I replace something he thinks isn't broken. He still refuses to admit that he needs help carrying heavy boxes. And every Sunday morning, he makes coffee strong enough to strip paint. Sometimes we sit outside without talking. Those are my favorite moments. After years of noise, silence feels different. Peace feels different. Ordinary life feels like something precious instead of something boring. I used to believe I had left my old life behind when I walked away from the people who trained me. But I eventually realized that you never completely erase the person you had to become to survive. You simply decide when that person gets to step forward. When the iron vultures threatened my father, that part of me returned. But I didn't let it control me. I used the discipline it had taught me. I used patience. I used evidence. I used restraint. And I remembered the promise my mother had left behind. Protect your father. Expose them. Don't let anger make you careless. I kept every word. The last time I saw Victor Rourke was in a courtroom. He looked smaller than I remembered. No expensive coat. No intimidating entourage. No motorcycles waiting outside. Just a man sitting behind a table while the evidence against him was read aloud. He looked at me once. Our eyes met across the room. I expected hatred. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. Confusion. He still couldn't understand why I hadn't killed him, why I had chosen evidence instead of revenge, why the son he had tried to intimidate had walked away without becoming another criminal. After the hearing, he asked me one question through his attorney. Why? I knew exactly what he meant. Why didn't you finish this yourself? My answer was simple. Because my father raised me better. That was the end of it. The iron vultures disappeared. Their motorcycles were seized. Their businesses were closed. Their members faced charges. Their protection racket ended. But the most important thing wasn't what happened to them. It was what happened to the people they had frightened for years. Store owners stopped paying. Families stopped looking over their shoulders. People started reporting crimes without assuming nothing would happen. The town changed slowly, then all at once. My father became something of a local legend, although he hated the attention. People would stop him at the grocery store and thank him for standing up to the syndicate. He would always say the same thing. I didn't do anything, my son did, and I would tell him, you did the hardest part, you refused to surrender. He never believed that, but I did. Because courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is an old man sitting alone at his kitchen table, staring at an envelope demanding money, and deciding he won't be bullied. Sometimes courage is calling your son, even though you don't want to burden him. Sometimes courage is admitting you're scared. And sometimes courage is trusting the person you raised when danger finally comes to your door. My father trusted me. That mattered more than anything else. I had spent years operating in shadows, believing secrecy was strength, but that experience taught me something I hadn't learned in all my years of training. Strength isn't hiding what you can do. Strength is knowing you could do something terrible and choosing not to. The iron vultures had mistaken restraint for weakness. They thought because I didn't announce myself, I was harmless. They thought because I lived quietly, I was ordinary. They thought my father had nobody. They were wrong about every part of it. The truth was, I didn't need to show them what I had been trained to do. I only needed to make sure they could never hurt him again. And when I look back now, I realize the most important moment wasn't when Rourke was arrested. It wasn't when the syndicate collapsed. It wasn't even when my father came home. It was the moment I stepped out of that car in the rain and told Marcus Vale to take his hands off my father, because that was the moment the entire balance changed. They believed they were confronting an angry son. They didn't realize they were confronting a man who had spent years learning how to remain calm when everything around him became chaos. But even then, I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for the simple right of an old man to sit on his porch without fear. That was all. And sometimes, that is more powerful than revenge will ever be. Months after the trial, I found my mother's old letter again. Dad had framed a copy and placed it beside a photograph of the three of us from before she died. I read the final line again. Don't let anger make you careless. I finally understood why she had written it. She wasn't warning me not to be strong, she was warning me not to let other people's cruelty decide what kind of man I became. The iron vultures wanted me angry, they wanted me reckless, they wanted me to make one mistake so they could use it against me. Instead, I stayed patient. I gathered the truth. I protected my father, and I watched them destroy themselves. My father once asked me whether I regretted the life I had lived. I told him I regretted what it had cost me. The birthdays I missed, the holidays I spent away, the years I couldn't explain where I was, but I didn't regret learning how to protect people, because when the moment came, those skills gave me the patience to keep my father alive and the discipline to choose justice over revenge. That distinction matters. Anyone can become angry. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can let pain control their decisions. Real strength is harder. Real strength is standing in front of someone who has threatened the person you love and still having enough control to choose what happens next. That's what I learned, and that's what my father taught me without ever realizing it. He raised me to protect people, not punish them. The iron vultures raised themselves on fear. In the end, fear was the only thing holding them together. Once people stopped being afraid, everything collapsed. My father never paid them another dollar. Not one. He never apologized to them. Never begged. Never surrendered. And when the final member of the syndicate was sentenced, Dad sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset like it was any other evening. "You know what the best part is?" he asked. "What?" "I still have my house," I smiled. "Yeah, Dad." He looked at me. "And you still have your father?" I nodded. "Yeah." We sat there quietly. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine passed along the highway. Dad looked toward the sound for a moment, then returned his attention to his coffee. No fear, no panic, just peace. That was the ending the iron vultures never expected. They wanted money. They wanted control. They wanted my father frightened. Instead, they gave me a reason to come home. They thought an elderly man was powerless. They never understood that his greatest protection wasn't a locked door or a weapon. It was the son he had raised. They thought they were extorting a vulnerable old man. They didn't know his son was an elite assassin. But the greatest surprise wasn't what I could do. It was what I refused to do. I refused to become another version of them. I refused to let anger erase everything my parents had taught me. I refused to turn my father's suffering into an excuse for losing myself. And in the end, that's why we won. Not because I was more dangerous, because I was more disciplined. Not because I destroyed them, because I exposed them. Not because I became the monster they feared, because I remained the son my father raised. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more daily revenge stories, because the most powerful stories aren't always about the person who can fight the hardest. They're about the person who has every reason to lose control, but chooses discipline, family, and justice instead. If you've ever had someone underestimate you because they thought you were quiet, old, ordinary, or alone, then you already understand the lesson at the heart of this story. People often mistake silence for weakness. They mistake kindness for helplessness. They mistake age for vulnerability. And sometimes, they discover far too late that the person standing quietly in front of them has someone behind him who refuses to let him fall. My father didn't need to become violent. He didn't need to become someone else. He simply needed to stand his ground long enough for the truth to come out. And I didn't need to prove how dangerous I could be. I needed to make sure he could sleep peacefully again. That was the mission. That was the victory. And that's the ending I wanted. Not revenge in the traditional sense. Not another body. Not another family destroyed. Just an old man on his porch, drinking coffee, knowing nobody was coming to his door demanding money anymore. The iron vultures thought they had found an easy target. Instead, they awakened the one person they never should have threatened. They thought my father was alone. He wasn't. They thought his son was ordinary. He wasn't. And they thought fear would control the ending. It didn't. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the moral dilemma I want you to debate. If you were in my shoes, and a biker syndicate threatened your elderly father, would you have trusted the justice system and waited for the authorities, or would you have taken justice into your own hands? Would you have been able to walk away from personal revenge after seeing your father threatened, or would the anger have been too strong? Tell me where you would draw the line, because sometimes the hardest battle isn't defeating the person standing against you. It's deciding what kind of person you will be after the battle is over. Take care of your families, protect the people who trust you, stay strong when life gets dark, and never mistake a quiet person for a powerless one. And most importantly, remember this: sometimes the most dangerous thing a criminal can do is threaten someone who has a family member willing to come home. I'll see you in the next story.
Hi, hello my Karmanox YouTube family, how are you? I am creator behind Karmanox YouTuber. Today my channel is gone monetize. YouTube give me monetization partnership program. I am so happy. This benefit my all subscriber and YouTube family. You my channel subscribe and watch video, share and your friend. So thanks your the support and my help. I hope you again and again watch my channel stories you like and share your friend. I know you too many my subscriber like stories and comments. I am all comments read one by one and reply you. So you daily watch videos and support, like, share, comments my channel. Again, your thanks. Thank you so much. Uh, Today my cat now sleeping. One viewer asked me, see upload last part and your cat video. My cat is very lovely. Okay, next video I upload my cat video ending story point, then next my cat video last part, first part in my story and last part my cat video and my baby video. Thank you watching and supporting my channel Karma Knox. Goodbye, see you next.